Elia's ward had never imagined that his life would lead him to the far edges of the galaxy, standing before a glowing palace suspended in the sky, waiting to meet a princess he was meant to marry. He had spent years as a diplomat, negotiating trade deals and mediating disputes on Earth, but nothing could prepare him for the sight of Zarathia. Its cities floated effortlessly above crystalline rivers, connected by delicate bridges of light, while enormous trees glowed softly in colors he had no words for. The planet felt alive, almost breathing, as if every part of it moved in harmony with a rhythm humans could barely understand. The mission that brought him here was simple in concept but heavy with responsibility. The leaders of Earth and Zarathia had been on the brink of conflict for decades. Skirmishes over mining rights, territorial disputes, and misunderstandings between their cultures had pushed the two planets dangerously close to war. Diplomatic negotiations had failed repeatedly, and the councils of both worlds decided on an unusual, bold solution: a symbolic marriage. Elias was to marry Princess Lyra, heir to the Zarathian throne, uniting the two worlds in a bond that could inspire trust and peace. Elias straightened his uniform and took a deep breath as he walked down the grand avenue leading to the palace gates. Zarathians lined the streets, their forms tall and elegant, their skin reflecting soft shades of light. Unlike humans, their features were angular, almost crystalline, yet there was a warmth in their eyes that made him feel oddly at ease. He knew they were watching, judging, and hoping, but he also knew that the success of this union rested not just on appearances, it rested on his ability to connect with Lyra in a way that transcended politics. The palace itself was a masterpiece of Zarathian architecture. Towers of transparent crystal spiraled upward, catching the sun in prismatic flashes. Gardens floated alongside the structures, their plants suspended in midair as if gravity had chosen not to follow the rules here. The air was fragrant with alien flowers, a mixture of sweet and earthy scents that made Elias feel both nervous and exhilarated. This was not just a palace, it was a statement. Every corner seemed designed to show the human visitor that Zarathia was a civilization of sophistication, beauty, and power. When the doors of the main hall opened, Elias was greeted by Lyra, standing at the center of a platform that shimmered with soft light. She was unlike anyone he had ever seen. Her presence was commanding yet gentle. Her eyes, large and luminous, seemed to hold centuries of knowledge and understanding. Her posture was regal, yet she smiled at him in a way that softened the distance between them. Elias felt a strange mix of awe and nervousness. He was here to marry her, but at that moment he realized marriage was not just a duty. It might be the start of something neither of them fully understood. The ceremony was unlike anything Elias had witnessed on Earth. Zarathians did not have chairs. Guests floated on platforms of light. Music was made by instruments that seemed alive, their notes bending and folding in ways that made the air itself shimmer. The words of the ceremony were spoken in Zarathian, a language of flowing sounds that Elias could not follow fully, but he understood enough to know that vows were being exchanged. Lyra's voice carried over the hall like a gentle current, and when she reached out her hand to him, he felt the weight of history, duty, and possibility all at once. For the first few days after the wedding, life was a whirlwind. Elias and Lyra attended gatherings, hosted delegations, and appeared in ceremonies meant to showcase the unity of Earth and Zarathia. Everywhere they went, Zarathians watched them with curiosity. Some admired Elias for his calm and intelligence. Others whispered doubts. Could a human truly understand a Zarathian princess? Could he carry the weight of their traditions while remaining himself? Lyra, despite her royal upbringing, surprised Elias in small, unexpected ways. She asked questions that showed curiosity about human life. She laughed at his awkward attempts to explain Earth customs, and she seemed genuinely interested in his thoughts and feelings. At night, when the palace was quiet and the floating lights of Zarathia twinkled like stars, they would sit together on a balcony overlooking the gardens. Elias learned that Lyra enjoyed wandering among the floating forests and that she preferred quiet moments of reflection to grand public displays. Yet, beneath her warmth, Elias sensed a quiet sadness. She spoke of her duties and responsibilities with a calm tone, but there were moments when her gaze would drift away, as if she carried a secret that weighed on her heart. Elias wanted to ask, to understand, but he also knew that some truths were revealed only in their own time. He focused instead on learning about her world, listening to stories of Zarathian history, and observing the rituals that had shaped their society for generations. As Elias explored Zarathia, he was struck by the level of harmony in their society. Science and art were intertwined. Citizens were encouraged to explore their creativity alongside their work. Education was universal, and even children were taught not only mathematics and history, but also ethics, empathy, and interspecies cooperation. There was a sense of purpose here, a shared understanding that each action contributed to the greater good. Elias admired it, and he began to see why the council had chosen marriage as a symbol. If he and Lyra could find understanding in each other, perhaps humans and Zarathians could do the same. Despite the elegance and sophistication, there were challenges. Cultural misunderstandings arose almost daily. Simple gestures that were polite on Earth could be seen as disrespectful on Zarathia, and Elias found himself constantly navigating these nuances. He worried about saying the wrong thing in public, but Lyra's quiet guidance helped him adapt. She never scolded. Instead, she explained and demonstrated, showing patience that eased his anxiety. One evening, as they walked through a forest suspended in midair, the leaves glowing in shades of gold and blue, Elias asked Lyra why she seemed so quiet during the ceremonies. She paused, her fingers brushing the light-infused branches, and said softly, "Every role has expectations. Sometimes, what the world expects is different from what the heart feels. I have learned to carry them together, but it is not always easy." Elias understood that more was at stake than appearances. Their marriage was a bridge, but it was also a test of character. He began to see Lyra not just as a princess or a symbol, but as a person with hopes, fears, and a quiet strength that drew him in. He realized that if he could meet her in honesty and empathy, their partnership might grow beyond diplomacy into something more profound. The first month passed quickly, filled with ceremonies, tour of Zarathia's floating cities, and quiet moments in hidden gardens. Elias and Lyra discovered shared interests, an appreciation for literature, a fascination with the stars, and a desire to explore the unknown. They laughed together, debated ideas, and found comfort in each other's presence. Yet in the back of his mind, Elias could not shake the feeling that there was more to Lyra than she let on, a truth hidden beneath the glow of her smile. As they prepared for the first grand celebration of the Alliance, a festival meant to honor both Earth and Zarathia, Elias felt a mixture of excitement and apprehension. The festival would bring leaders from across the galaxy, all observing this new bond. Success here could cement peace. Failure could undo everything. He glanced at Lyra, who adjusted the flowing fabric of her ceremonial attire, and realized that together they carried the hopes of two worlds. That night under the twin moons of Zarathia, Elias stood beside Lyra on the palace balcony. The lights of the floating cities reflected in her eyes, and he felt a surge of determination. Whatever lay ahead, he would face it with honesty, patience, and respect. For the first time, he understood that marriage in its truest form was not about duty alone. It was about connection, trust, and shared purpose. And if he could help Lyra feel safe enough to share her true self, perhaps the bond between their worlds could grow stronger than anyone had imagined. And so, the first chapter of their life together on Zarathia ended not with fireworks or grand gestures, but with quiet understanding, a beginning that promised challenges, discoveries, and the possibility of something far greater than a mere alliance. Elias knew that the real journey had only just begun, and as he gazed at the stars above, he felt a small thrill of hope, wondering what wonders and revelations awaited them both. Life on Zarathia settled into a rhythm, though it was far from ordinary. For Elias Ward, each day brought new wonders, new lessons, and new challenges. The floating city beneath the twin moons seemed alive, its soft lights reflecting on the crystalline towers and winding rivers of liquid light. Each morning, Elias would wake to a chorus of alien birds, their calls resonating like music in the airy palaces. Though he had been trained to face political challenges, nothing had prepared him for the subtleties of daily life among the Zarathians. Princess Lyra greeted him each morning with a quiet warmth that made the palace feel less like a formal residence and more like home. Her smile, though small, seemed to carry the weight of centuries of expectation, and Elias could sense the restraint in her movements, the careful balance of being royal yet approachable. He quickly realized that being a husband in this environment was different from anything he had experienced. Every gesture, every word was under scrutiny. The eyes of her people watched, the cameras of Zarathian historians recorded, and the whispers of tradition lingered in every corridor. Despite these pressures, Lyra showed him the hidden parts of her world. Each evening, after the public engagements ended, she would take Elias through secret gardens suspended in midair, where glowing flowers opened only at night and the gentle hum of energy filled the air. They wandered over streams of liquid light, stepping on bridges that shimmered like glass but held them effortlessly. Here, away from the ceremonies and politics, they could simply exist as two beings learning each other's rhythms. Elias quickly noticed that Lyra was far more than a symbol. She had curiosity, humor, and a sharp intelligence that caught him off guard. She asked questions about Earth not as a diplomat seeking information, but as someone genuinely fascinated by human life. She wanted to know about simple things, how people ate, what stories they told their children, how they celebrated small joys. Elias found himself answering in detail, sometimes laughing at her questions, sometimes marveling at how little he had considered about his own world through Zarathian eyes. One evening, Lyra led Elias to a floating library. The books were not ordinary. They hovered in the air, opening their pages as readers approached. Words and images shimmered in 3 dimensions, folding and unfolding as if the stories themselves were alive. She encouraged him to touch them, to explore, to let the books respond to his curiosity. Elias ran his fingers through the light, feeling a strange connection to knowledge as something dynamic, something living. In that moment, he realized Zarathians saw learning as an adventure, not an obligation. But as they explored, he began noticing subtle signs of Lyra's inner struggle. When a Zarathian official mentioned the prospect of heirs during a meeting, Lyra's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. When the press praised the union as perfect, she seemed momentarily distant. Elias noticed these small reactions, but he did not press her. Instead, he chose patience, learning that trust and understanding could not be forced. He focused on listening, observing, and sharing experiences in quiet moments. One morning, the two attended a gathering of scholars and diplomats discussing a new joint energy project between Earth and Zarathia. Elias spoke about human technology, describing ways their planets could share resources and ideas. Lyra listened carefully, occasionally adding her insights, which revealed a deep understanding of physics and ecology. Her observations were precise, intelligent, and sometimes surprising, showing Elias that the princess was not only knowledgeable but thoughtful in her analysis. After the discussion, she led him to a terrace overlooking a river of liquid light. "Do you see," she said, gesturing to the flowing luminescence below, "how everything here is connected? The trees, the buildings, even the light. Our society functions best when we understand how one part affects another. People, ideas, cultures, it is the same. Elias nodded, impressed. I can see that. It makes sense why your world has lasted so long without major conflict. Everything is considered carefully. Lyra looked at him with something in her eyes that he could not yet name. And yet, she said softly, even in the most perfect systems there are things we cannot control. Feelings, choices, secrets, they always exist, even if we try to hide them. Elias did not answer. He sensed that her words were both a warning and an invitation. He wanted to ask more, but the moment passed, leaving them in a silence that was neither awkward nor tense. It was simply a shared understanding that some truths revealed themselves slowly. Over the next weeks, Elias began accompanying Lyra on her private routines. She would visit the lower gardens, helping young Zarathians cultivate floating plants, or guide him through the energy conduits that powered the city. Each visit allowed Elias to see the balance she maintained between tradition and personal curiosity. She was disciplined, focused, and kind in equal measure. He admired her ability to carry responsibility with grace. Their bond grew as Elias learned more about her everyday life. They shared meals in quiet alcoves, discussing ideas ranging from interstellar trade to poetry. Lyra laughed at his clumsy attempts to imitate Zarathian cuisine, and Elias laughed at her careful attempts to eat human dishes without making a mess. These small, ordinary moments became a sanctuary in the otherwise formal environment of the palace. One afternoon, while floating along a path of bioluminescent flowers, Lyra confided in him something unusual. "Elias, do you ever feel like you are living two lives at once?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "One life that the world sees, full of duty and ceremony, and another, quieter, private life that only exists when no one else is looking." Elias considered this. "Yes," he said, "I think that is part of being human. We all have private lives, thoughts and feelings that may not fit with what others expect of us." Lyra looked at him, eyes reflecting the glowing petals beneath their feet. "I suppose that is why I enjoy showing you these hidden parts of Zarathia. With you, I can be both the princess and myself, without pretending one is more important than the other." Elias felt a warmth in his chest. He understood her words not only as a statement about Zarathia, but also as a bridge between them. Their relationship was growing beyond politics, moving into trust and companionship. He realized that he, too, was beginning to cherish her not just as a symbol but as a person. Despite the deepening connection, there were moments that reminded Elias of the expectations surrounding them. Officials often asked pointed questions about the future, hinting at heirs and family plans. Each time he noticed a subtle hesitation in Lyra, a shadow in her luminous eyes. He began to suspect that there was more to her life than she had shared, yet he refrained from pressing her. He had learned that patience was the key to understanding, and forcing revelations would break trust rather than build it. One evening, during a quiet walk over the city gardens, Lyra stopped near a glowing tree that swayed as if it were breathing. She looked at Elias, and for the first time there was a vulnerability in her expression. "There are expectations," she said slowly. "Expectations I cannot always meet, even though I want to. It is difficult, living in the light while hiding shadows." Elias reached for her hand, feeling the delicate strength in her grip. "Lyra, whatever your secrets are, whatever you cannot share yet, I want to understand when you are ready. We are in this together, not as symbols but as partners." She met his gaze, and for a moment the barriers of protocol, tradition, and status seemed to dissolve. In that silent exchange, Elias understood something profound. The bond they were forming was not only about diplomacy or political alliance, it was about trust, patience, and emotional honesty. In the weeks that followed, their private moments became more frequent. They explored hidden parts of the floating city, played games with young Zarathians, and spent hours in quiet conversation about ideas, dreams, and philosophies. Elias noticed that Lyra would sometimes retreat into thought during public events, but she always returned to him in private, sharing her reflections and allowing him glimpses of her true self. Elias also began to understand the Zarathian view of the universe. They saw life as a web of interconnected energy, where every action, word, and thought influenced the whole. This perspective influenced everything from their architecture to their governance, and Elias found it both humbling and inspiring. He realized that their union had potential far beyond appearances. If humans could adopt even a fraction of this perspective, conflicts on Earth might be solved in ways that violence never could. The first festival, celebrating their marriage and the alliance of their worlds, was approaching. Delegates, scholars, and leaders from across the galaxy would attend. Elias felt a mixture of excitement and anxiety. Success at this event could solidify peace, while missteps could draw criticism or skepticism. Yet, he also realized that no matter what happened in public, the private bond he was building with Lyra would remain the foundation of their partnership. On the eve of the festival, Elias and Lyra sat quietly on a balcony overlooking the city. The twin moons reflected in the floating rivers below, casting soft silver light over the gardens. "Do you think people will understand us?" Elias asked. Lyra smiled faintly. "People often see what they want to see, but if we are honest, patient, and true to ourselves, they will eventually understand. Our bond is more than appearances. It is what we carry in quiet moments like this." Elias nodded, feeling the weight and truth of her words. He knew challenges lay ahead, not only in the public eye but also in the private truths that Lyra had yet to share. And he knew, with certainty, that he wanted to face them together. As the stars twinkled above Zarathia, Elias realized that the first step toward peace between their worlds was not in ceremonies, treaties, or symbols. It was in understanding, connection, and trust, the kind that grew slowly, quietly, and surely between two hearts learning to see each other fully. The festival was a dazzling display of light, music, and celebration. Delegates from across the galaxy had arrived, their ships floating gracefully above the city, reflecting in the liquid rivers and shining towers of Zarathia. Elias Ward felt the weight of expectation pressing on his shoulders. Every movement, every word, every glance was scrutinized. He had trained for diplomacy, for navigating delicate situations, but nothing could fully prepare him for the scrutiny of an entire galaxy. Princess Lyra, resplendent in her ceremonial robes that shimmered with iridescent threads, appeared calm and composed. Yet Elias, who had spent weeks observing her subtle moods, noticed a faint tension in her shoulders and a distant quality in her gaze. He followed her lead, allowing her to set the pace as they walked among the delegates, shaking hands, exchanging formal greetings, and answering questions about the alliance. Her grace and poise were extraordinary, yet he could sense that something unspoken lingered beneath the surface. After the official opening of the festival, Lyra guided Elias to a quiet terrace overlooking the city. The floating gardens glowed softly in the evening light, and the rivers of liquid luminescence reflected the twin moons above. The sounds of the festival, music, laughter, and conversation, were distant here, softened by the air and the height of the terrace. Elias finally dared to ask the question that had been on his mind for weeks. "Lyra," he began cautiously, "there is something I feel you're keeping from me, something important. I can see it in your eyes during the ceremonies and in your moments of silence. You don't have to tell me if you're not ready, but I want to understand you fully." Lyra looked at him, her luminous eyes reflecting the soft glow of the gardens. She hesitated, and for the first time Elias saw vulnerability, a trace of fear, in her normally composed expression. She took a deep breath, as if steadying herself against the weight of centuries of expectation. "There is something I have carried for most of my life," she said softly. A truth that I have never shared, not with anyone outside my closest advisors, and certainly not with anyone who might judge me. Elias nodded gently. You can trust me. Whatever it is, we face it together. Lyra's hands trembled slightly as she reached for his. I cannot have children, she confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. It is not a choice. It is a reality I have lived with since I was young. I have hidden it because our culture values heirs above all else, and because I feared it would overshadow everything else about me. For a moment, Elias did not speak. He felt a mixture of surprise, empathy, and concern, but none of it included anger or disappointment. Instead, he felt a profound respect for Lyra's honesty. The courage it took to reveal this secret, even in private, was immense. He squeezed her hands gently, anchoring her to the moment. Lyra, he said carefully, thank you for telling me. I cannot pretend that I understand everything you have felt, but I can promise you this. Your worth is not measured by tradition or expectations. You are the person I care about, the partner I chose, and the one I want to work with to build something meaningful. Not just for the galaxy, but for us. Tears welled in Lyra's eyes, but her smile was fragile and real. I feared this would change how you see me. I feared it might make everything we are trying to achieve weaker. Elias shook his head. No. If anything, it makes me admire you more. The alliance between our worlds is strong, but it does not rely solely on appearances or airs. It relies on trust, collaboration, and understanding. And that is what we have now, more than ever. They stood in silence for a while, the hum of the festival below fading into the background. Lyra's vulnerability had not diminished her, it had deepened their connection. For the first time, Elias understood the full weight of what they had undertaken, not just as a political union, but as a partnership grounded in honesty and mutual respect. Over the following days, the festival continued with art exhibitions, scientific demonstrations, and performances that celebrated both human and Zarathian culture. Delegates marveled at the floating gardens, the energy displays, and the collaborative projects between the two worlds. Yet in Elias' mind, the real victory was private. He and Lyra had reached a new level of understanding. They had shared a truth that could have divided them, and instead it brought them closer. Lyra, now freer from the burden of secrecy, began to show more of herself in public. She laughed more openly, engaged in conversations with delegates, and even participated in interactive exhibits alongside Elias. Together, they demonstrated that leadership and partnership were not about fulfilling expectations blindly, but about inspiring trust and innovation. Their example encouraged other delegates to see the value of empathy, collaboration, and honesty, rather than focusing solely on tradition. One afternoon, as they walked through a section of the festival dedicated to collaborative technology, Elias noticed a group of young Zarathians experimenting with floating energy spheres. The children's laughter reminded him of something he had not considered. The idea of family could be broader than biology. He turned to Lyra and shared his thoughts. We may not be able to have children, he said gently, but perhaps we can create something just as meaningful. Mentorship, guidance, education, even shared projects that inspire the next generation. Family doesn't always follow tradition. Lyra's eyes sparkled with a mixture of relief and excitement. I like that idea, she said softly. We can nurture curiosity, creativity, and understanding. Perhaps that is even more important than simply producing heirs. Encouraged by their new perspective, they began planning initiatives together. They visited schools, guided young scientists in experiments, and sponsored cultural exchanges between human and Zarathian students. Each project strengthened the alliance while also reinforcing their personal bond. Elias noticed that Lyra seemed lighter, more at ease, as she embraced her role beyond the constraints of tradition. Even in private moments, their connection deepened. They would explore hidden corners of the city, laugh at small absurdities, and share stories from their pasts, Elia's about Earth, Lyra about her childhood among the floating gardens. These conversations revealed their hopes, fears, and dreams. Elias learned that Lyra had always felt pressure to conform, to fulfill a role defined by centuries of expectation. Sharing her secret of infertility had been a turning point, not just for him, but for her. One evening, while floating above the city on a bridge of light, Elias turned to Lyra. "Do you ever regret agreeing to this marriage?" he asked. Lyra looked at him thoughtfully. "Sometimes I wonder if I can live up to what everyone expects of me, but no, I do not regret it. Because I have discovered something I could not have imagined. That connection, understanding, and trust can be stronger than any expectation, and I have discovered it with you." Elias felt a surge of emotion. He reached for her hand, holding it firmly as they gazed out at the glowing city below. "Then we will face the future together," he said. "No matter what challenges come, we have each other, and that will be enough." Their bond became a quiet anchor in a world of scrutiny and expectation. While the festival continued with its dazzling displays, Elias and Lyra focused on what truly mattered, building a partnership grounded in honesty, respect, and shared purpose. The alliance between their worlds was strengthened not by appearances, but by the example they set as a couple who embraced truth and connection. As the final day of the festival approached, Elias and Lyra took a moment away from the crowds to stand on a high terrace overlooking the floating city. The sun was setting, casting golden and violet hues across the crystal towers and gardens. The rivers of light shimmered beneath them, reflecting both the sky and their intertwined reflections. "I never thought," Elias said softly, "that a marriage could teach me so much about trust, patience, and understanding." Lyra smiled, her hand resting on his. "It is not the ceremony that teaches, Elias. It is the moments in between. The quiet choices we make, the courage to share our truths, the willingness to see each other fully." Elias nodded, feeling a deep sense of purpose. He realized that the success of their union, and the alliance it symbolized, depended not on tradition or expectations, but on the authentic connection they nurtured. And with that connection, there was no challenge too great, no obstacle insurmountable. As the festival concluded with a gentle display of lights that danced across the sky, Elias and Lyra stood side by side, partners in every sense of the word. Their journey was far from over. There would be new expectations, new challenges, and new opportunities to demonstrate leadership and collaboration. But for the first time, Elias felt truly prepared, not because of training, protocol, or strategy, but because he had found a companion who shared his values, his curiosity, and his willingness to embrace the unknown together. And in that shared understanding, they discovered something more enduring than any festival or ceremony could provide. A bond built on trust, honesty, and the quiet, unwavering belief that together, they could shape the future of both their worlds. The days following the festival were quieter, yet charged with purpose. Elias and Lyra returned to their routines with a renewed sense of direction, understanding that their private connection was now the foundation of a public responsibility. They knew that Zarathia and Earth would be watching them not only as leaders of the Alliance, but as an example of what honesty, patience, and trust could achieve. Every choice they made mattered, and together they were determined to show that a marriage, or a partnership, could be meaningful even without fulfilling traditional expectations. Lyra suggested they focus on projects that would have lasting impact rather than simply performing ceremonial duties. They visited the lower districts of the floating city, where young Zarathians learned about science, culture, and ethics. Elias watched her interact with the students, guiding experiments, asking thoughtful questions, and encouraging curiosity. The children responded eagerly, not only to her authority as a princess, but also to her warmth and sincerity. Elias felt a surge of admiration for her, realizing that leadership was not about commanding attention, it was about inspiring it. Together, they also visited human delegations, offering workshops on joint scientific projects. Elias shared Earth technology, while Lyra demonstrated Zarathian approaches to sustainable energy and environmental balance. In these moments, the alliance became tangible, a collaboration of knowledge, culture, and vision. Delegates took notes, students observed closely, and both humans and Zarathians began to see that the future of their worlds depended not on hierarchy, but on shared effort and understanding. Despite these successes, Elias knew the question of heirs would not disappear. Traditionalists continued to watch for signs that the union might fail because it could not produce children. One morning, while preparing for a public address on interplanetary cooperation, Elias sensed Lyra's unease. She adjusted her robes with a precision that betrayed her anxiety. "Do you think people will understand?" she asked quietly. "Or will they still judge us?" Elias placed his hand over hers, steadying her. "They may question us at first," he said, "but when they see what we are building, when they see our dedication and our honesty, they will understand. Leadership is not about conforming to expectation. It is about guiding with purpose." The public address was scheduled in the palace's central plaza, a vast open space that floated above the city. Delegates from dozens of planets gathered, their forms shimmering under the multicolored light of the floating gardens. Holographic displays illustrated the projects and collaborations between Earth and Zarathia, and the crowd waited expectantly for the words of the princess and her human partner. Elias and Lyra approached the podium together, a gesture of unity that had been rehearsed countless times. Yet, as they stood side by side, Elias realized that rehearsals could not prepare them for authenticity. This moment was real. This moment was theirs to shape. Lyra spoke first, her voice clear, steady, yet infused with emotion. "We are honored to welcome you all to this gathering, not just as representatives of Earth and Zarathia, but as partners who share a vision of cooperation, understanding, and growth." She glanced at Elias, her eyes holding the trust and honesty they had cultivated together. "Our marriage is a symbol of unity, but it is also a testament to a truth we hold dear. Connection, trust, and purpose define strength, not simply the expectations imposed upon us." The crowd listened in silence, some skeptical, some intrigued. Elias then stepped forward, taking his turn. "We understand that tradition often places certain expectations on leaders, families, and alliances, but we believe the future is built not on conformity, but on collaboration. Together, Lyra and I have learned that trust, honesty, and shared purpose are stronger than appearances alone. We invite you to join us in shaping a future where all beings are valued for their contributions, not just for fulfilling roles expected of them." The plaza was quiet for a moment, as if the words themselves had lingered in the air. Then, slowly, applause began. Delegates nodded, students smiled, and Zarathians exchanged glances that spoke of respect and curiosity. The message was clear. A union based on honesty, partnership, and shared vision was valid and valuable, regardless of traditional measures of success. Over the following weeks, the principles they had outlined became more than words. Joint educational programs flourished, scientific research accelerated, and cultural exchanges deepened understanding between the two worlds. Human and Zarathian students worked together on projects ranging from renewable energy to artistic collaborations, discovering new ways of thinking and problem-solving. Elias and Lyra observed with pride, knowing that their partnership had created ripples that would influence generations to come. Even in private, their connection continued to deepen. They explored hidden parts of the city, experimented with new projects, and spent quiet nights under the twin moons discussing philosophy, history, and dreams. Elias often marveled at Lyra's balance, her ability to manage duty while nurturing curiosity, her capacity for compassion without compromising integrity. He felt privileged to walk beside her, not as a mere diplomat or symbolic husband, but as a true partner in vision and purpose. One day, while visiting a research laboratory where humans and Zarathians were testing a new energy conduit, Elias noticed Lyra interacting with a group of students, with a patience and kindness that reminded him of the qualities he admired most. One young Zarathian asked her why she chose to focus on projects beyond producing heirs. Lyra paused thoughtfully before answering. Because the future is created not only by children, she said, but by ideas, by collaboration, and by the courage to share knowledge and compassion. Every action, every choice we make, contributes to the world we want to live in. Elias listened, heart swelling with admiration. Her words reflected not only her intelligence but her wisdom, a wisdom gained from years of navigating expectation, duty, and secrecy. He realized that the strength of their union lay not in fulfilling traditional roles, but in their shared commitment to shaping a meaningful and lasting alliance between their worlds. As months passed, the story of their partnership began to spread across Zarathia and Earth. People spoke not only of the princess and her human husband, but of the example they set. Their alliance was no longer seen merely as a political convenience. It became a symbol of integrity, trust, and the power of honesty. Young leaders and citizens alike began to emulate their approach, valuing collaboration, empathy, and vision over rigid adherence to tradition. One evening, as Elias and Lyra stood on a balcony overlooking the floating city, she spoke quietly. "Do you think people will ever fully accept that we define our own path?" Elias took her hand, holding it firmly. "I think acceptance takes time, but it begins with understanding. And we have already inspired understanding, not just through words but through our actions. Our partnership shows what is possible when honesty and purpose guide decisions." Lyra smiled, the tension from past months eased. "I am grateful for you, Elias. You have taught me that courage is not only in action but in honesty. I can be myself with you, and together we can show the galaxy that strength comes from truth, connection, and shared vision." Elias felt a warmth spread through him. "And I am grateful for you. You have shown me that leadership, partnership, and life itself are most meaningful when we embrace trust, patience, and the willingness to grow together." As the sun set behind the floating towers, casting golden and violet light across the city, Elias and Lyra watched their world from above. They saw the humans and Zarathians working together, learning from each other, and celebrating shared accomplishments. They understood that this was only the beginning. The alliance was strong, not because of tradition, ceremony, or appearances, but because it was built on authenticity, collaboration, and mutual respect. In the following months, they initiated a series of projects that had lasting effects: interplanetary research programs, joint cultural festivals, and mentorship networks that allowed humans and Zarathians to guide each other's young minds. They even established shared archives, combining the histories, philosophies, and stories of both worlds into a single living record. In every project, the principles that had guided their personal relationship, honesty, trust, patience, and curiosity, shone through. The legacy of their partnership began to ripple outward. Leaders who had been skeptical saw the power of collaboration firsthand. Citizens who had doubted a human-princess union witnessed the results of integrity and shared vision. Even tradition-bound elders began to acknowledge that alliances could be successful without conforming to outdated expectations. Elias and Lyra had not only united two worlds, they had reshaped the perception of what a partnership could be. One evening, while standing on a balcony, Elias asked Lyra about her thoughts for the future. "Do you think we have changed enough minds?" he said. Lyra looked out over the glowing cityscape, her expression serene. "Perhaps not all minds, but the seeds have been planted. Understanding grows slowly like the floating gardens. We cannot control the pace, but we can nurture it, and we will continue to do so together." Elias nodded, feeling a quiet joy. They had faced the expectations of culture, tradition, and history, and emerged not only unbroken but stronger. Their love and partnership were no longer defined by what they could not achieve. They were defined by what they had built together, a foundation of trust, honesty, and purpose. As the twin moons rose above the floating city, casting gentle silver light over the gardens and rivers below, Elias and Lyra stood hand in hand. Their eyes met, and for a moment, all the worries, pressures, and expectations of the galaxy faded. They were no longer just a diplomat and a princess. They were partners, collaborators, and friends united by vision and heart. In that quiet, luminous moment, they understood the truth that had guided them all along. Strength does not come from fulfilling others' expectations. Strength comes from honesty, trust, and the courage to walk a path together, even when it is unconventional. They had begun as a symbolic marriage, chosen to bring peace between worlds, but they had grown into something far greater. Their bond had become a beacon, showing that unity, collaboration, and understanding could achieve what force and tradition could never accomplish. And so, Elia's ward and Princess Lyra looked out over the city they helped shape, hearts aligned, purpose clear, and the galaxy beginning to understand that the truest alliances, whether between people or worlds, were built on honesty, trust, and the courage to define one's own future. Together, they had not only bridged two civilizations, they had forged a new era of understanding, hope, and shared vision.